much for joining us here at Brad Dacus Live. I am, of course, not Brad Dacus. He's out today, and I'm filling in. My name is Michael Peffer, and I'm the attorney, the director of the Southern California office for Pacific Justice Institute. Mr. Dacus, the founder and president of Pacific Justice Institute, will be back soon. Folks, we are living in a time of great turmoil. Every time it seems like we turn around, there is issues happening that are just seemingly almost too much to take. And I'm thinking today about the tragic shooting in Colorado. And I'll leave it to everybody else to figure out the whys. I'll leave it to everybody else to determine the whys. But for today, I thought it might be good for us and to just pray for a couple minutes, just to, not a couple minutes, but just to say a word of prayer for those people who lost loved ones and who are injured and badly hurting, and our nation. So if you would join me, I'd appreciate it. Father, we just thank you so much for your goodness, Lord. We thank you for all that you are and all that you do. We are so blessed, God, that you take care of us, that your way is the right way, and that at the end of the argument, all that we are dealing with today is the fact that we have shut Jesus Christ of Nazareth out of our lives. And so, Father, we pray for all those injured in the shootings in Georgia and the shootings in Colorado. We pray that you would be with them and be a real presence for them in this Boulder, the town of Boulder. And I pray, God, that you would just bring people to life that are needing the gospel, the hope of peace in Jesus. And so, Lord, we pray all these things. We ask for your will to be done. We ask that you bless the families that are mourning the loss of loved ones. In Jesus' name, amen. So thanks, folks. Again, I think that the issue that we are involved in, the fight that we are involved in, that we talk about every day here, is a fight that must begin and end on our knees. And I encourage your prayer for us here, but as well as for our country and our leaders. Lord knows that we need it. Well, we have a special show for you today. In our second half, we are going to bring on our attorney out of Nevada, and she's going to talk to us about some real important topics about the issues dealing with the college campuses. We know that it's a mess. We deal with it all the time. We here have dealt with these kinds of cases, and we've dealt with them a lot. And we're hoping to bring some both information to you all and the ability to deal with how do we deal with this? How, if you're a professor, how do you deal with the onslaught of wickedness in the college campuses? Because we know that really the only ideas that are shut out oftentimes in the college campuses is those things that are biblical standards. And those are pushed out while we embrace over and over and over again, we embrace the issues of worldliness, and it seems like, and we'll talk about this, diversity is a concept that doesn't include the diversity including the conservative traditional values. That's out. That's not included in diversity, and we've seen this time and time again, that the so-called diversity committees and such on college campuses basically push out everything that is not in the value system of the ways of things. So we'll deal with that in the second half. We also will address, and perhaps now is a good time to talk about that, this shooting in Colorado. It's a desperate situation. We oftentimes we hear that the first refrain of many in our society is to take a tragic problem that we are dealing with and take that problem and make it into a gun control issue. But folks, we know that is not the issue, gun control. And we're going to have more of that in the coming days, the issue of what that means. But for now, I am very pleased to bring on Pacific Justice Institute Chief Counsel Kevin Snyder. We are very blessed to have him at Pacific Justice Institute, and I'm blessed to have him here on the show today. Good morning, Kevin.
Pleased to be with you, Michael. Blessed to be here.
All right, great. So we want to talk about today, and I think this is really important stuff on this so-called HR 1. Can you give us like a 30-second intro into what is HR 1 that we're hearing so much about?
Well, this is supposedly an election reform bill. Now, during the last election, there was systematic fraud, and any objective person looking at the actual evidence would be confronted with that sobering reality. The problem is that HR 1, the goal of HR 1 is that it takes the conditions that led to fraud and enshrines them into federal law, making them both legal and permanent.
Yeah, that is, and that's a terrible goal for us, because it's so interesting, and we see that Congress doing this over and over and over again, talking up principles that are, set euphemisms for whatever. So this HR 1 seems to be that type of. It seems to be that type of thing where we say it's one thing, but we're really doing another. And so one of the important things that we deal with here, folks, and while we're dealing with some internet trouble with our guests, we're dealing with a law that has been created by the House of Representatives, and it's really a smokescreen. Would you agree that it is a smokescreen, Kevin?
It is, and you hit the proverbial nail on the head. This is very much Orwellian doublespeak. They're claiming to be cleaning up election fraud, but in fact they're codifying it.
Yes. Let's look at some the specifics. I understand there will be some form of universal voter registration. And boy, that sounds so nice. Universal voter registration, everybody will just be registered. It's a little more sinister than that, right?
Yeah, well, how it works, essentially, the mechanics of it is that it takes government databases, like the Department of Motor Vehicles, the welfare offices, federal agencies, Social Security, Department of Labor, Bureau of Prisons, Federal Bureau of Prisons, and it takes all those people and automatically registers them to vote.
Wow. So conceivably, then, obviously, I have seen a push to have prisoners voting, recently released felons voting, and this would basically codify it so that any agency that has a custody or a control over people and what they're doing can now register people to vote.
Yeah, and the problem is that the principles of a democratic republic is that to be meaningful, a voting right is for the eligible citizen. And here, let's take a Department of Motor Vehicles. Not everyone who has a driver's license is eligible to vote. We have people who are not citizens, foreign students, exchange students. We have 16, 17-year-olds who have a driver's license. And in California, you actually have unlawful immigrants are allowed to have driver's licenses. So these people are now on the voter rolls,
Right.
or
And
would be on the voter rolls.
exactly. I think in California, they may well already be, this may be an issue in California already, but to look at this, um, are there checks and balances in place to ensure that we still maintain our democratic republic?
Unfortunately, I hate to tell you that there are not, and in fact, there are things set in place to prevent checks and balances.
Oh boy.
States are required to provide for absentee vote by mail in elections for federal offices, and they are not allowed to have a voter identification for that. And so you could imagine how much problems that would cause. Then it also mandates online voter registration. And let's say you have a poll worker who sees what he or she suspects to be voter fraud, like, say, a 16-year-old kid who's coming in and is going to vote. And so the problem is the law has been written so there is a disincentive to call that out. And in fact, the disincentive is that voter, that person who raises eyebrows about it, is subject to prosecution as a felon with a 5-year
Wow.
prison sentence.
Wow, this is incredible. You know, and one of the things that so many of our audience, so many in our audience, will remember very acutely is all the shenanigans from the election just occurred in November of last year. And we saw all kinds of issues like ballot dumping, backdating postal marks, same-day walk-in voter registration, shredding paper ballots, et cetera, et cetera, and even attempts to stop any kind of audits regarding them.
Yeah, it's sadly you have pushback from both the people who are charged with ensuring election integrity, which would be election officials. They have, unfortunately, many of them are the biggest perpetrators of fraud themselves, or orchestrate it.
Yes.
And then, of course, you have the courts that are simply, jumped out of the batter's box when they saw a fast pitch and wouldn't take these cases.
Wow.
And it's pretty shameful. So there are problems. Let me give you an example with this absentee voter ballot situation. At the last election, there were 26 million ballots were mailed out at the last election that were never returned. Well, someone obviously could just gather ballots up in their area, fill them out fraudulently with whomever they would prefer to win elections, and then dump them in unmanned drop boxes, ballot boxes.
Yes.
And obviously this is a problem, and of course there's no way to check that. For example, this notion of making it unlawful to keep the paper ballots so that you can't go and trace back and perform an audit or challenge a vote if it's suspect. They criminalized that, or at least prohibited it from keeping those ballots. So this is a recipe to prevent honest elections.
Yeah, boy, I'll tell you, the cynic in me wants to say that they're really codifying all the worst things that happened in our 2020 election and making it not just saying that they will occur, but that if anybody reports these things or tries to fight out against these things, or even if a state creates legislation that is designed to prevent these things, they're going to be forbidden by this so-called reform bill, correct?
That is, you've hit it spot on, Michael. Think of these postal workers in a couple of different states who reported that they were ordered to backdate late arriving ballots, just for signing those declarations, those affidavits. That would subject them not only to issues of penalties of perjury, but to a violation of this law as a whistleblower. So it is a real problem. And let me just explain for those listening or watching what this does. For example, the law would allow ballots to come in 10 days late. So you will have at least a 10-day delay in any election. And of course, that's going to give nefarious election workers opportunities to backfill by post or backdating ballots.
Wow.
So this is a real problem.
So how about issues such as election fraud via computer hacking? There was a lot of allegations here, and I think there were some discoveries that lended a lot of credence to it. Does this bill work at reforming that issue?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. The evidence on the computer hacking is pretty dead bang certain. But as far as, will this bill reform that? The answer is actually it creates, by having, let's say, the DMV and welfare departments have their databases turned into caches of voter registration databases.
Boy.
This makes it a target-rich environment for hackers. Makes it very easy for them to have a place they can go. You don't have to have someone going to a machine and plugging in secretly or surreptitiously plugging in a internet connection.
Right.
So this is a real problem.
Now, and it just seems like the fun and joy never ends with this bill. What about we talk about and hear about issues regarding the rights of association and free speech that seem to be at stake or being undermined as a result of this bill. What can you tell us about that?
Well, starting with the rights of association, a lot of folks who are not wealthy, they pool their money in together to leverage it to get more bang for their buck when they donate to a campaign. So let's say you and some folks at your church or your neighborhood or the people you go to your gym have similar political views. You want some senator or somebody to win an election, so you'll pool together, a few $100s here and there, so together it has a bigger impact. Well, what this does is this makes this grassroots citizen participation very difficult.
Wow. And
nearly impossible. The other thing that it does, which is terrifying, is that it expands disclosure of donor lists. Now, you and I know that, for example, after Proposition 8 passed, there was a purge of people from their jobs who donated money in support of Proposition 8, and they're subject to bullying and, of course, losing their employment. And so it's pretty terrible thing as far as rights to association.
Yeah, it really
but
is.
Speech is also an issue.
Yeah, that's a huge issue, and sort of the time-honored tradition relative to free speech and elections has been the ability to contribute to causes of people that you agree with, and to completely attempt to disarm that. And I think it's probably the left's continued fight against Citizens United, the case at the Supreme Court, which said that this is part of the free speech protection, but it seems to me that this is a very dangerous thing to have happen.
It is. And then there's also a provision that goes after nonprofit organizations. As you know, a nonprofit organization can engage in issue advocacy. In other words, for example, you and I belong to an organization. We support religious liberties, support pro-life things.
Yes.
Well, as long as our organization does not support or oppose a candidate for political office, we can do that.
Right.
But what this does is it expands that so that, or the restriction, so that if it's related to some, say, a bill that a senator or a congressman is putting forward, or a policy of a president, and we talk about the issue, they're going to link up that with the candidate and stifle speech. The other thing is a lot of organizations, out of an abundance of caution, will only talk about issues during non-election years.
Yeah.
But this will expand that scope, so it'll pull those people or those organizations in, and it'll threaten their IRS status.
Wow. And you know, obviously our voting enterprise carries with it a rather significant contribution and involvement to our democracy and how we get things done as a democracy, and how the people get to speak to their government in a democracy. And as we push and push and push these issues, we are finding that there are some who don't really care about the damage to our democratic enterprise. And maybe that leads me to do you have any final thoughts on how this kind of thing can impact our democratic republic?
Yeah, well, I have some real grave concerns about this. You know, a republic, historically, a republic can withstand a plague. It could withstand an economic collapse. It could withstand a war, even a civil war. Our country's gone through a civil war.
Yeah.
But a republic cannot survive the fraudulent tally of votes. That is fundamental. You can't have a representative government if you're not certain that your vote counts. And so this is possibly our darkest hour. I think that this is a greater threat to us by far than say even Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
Because under those situations we can mobilize, we could fight back, but to have our votes in question is a very, very dangerous threat to our system.
Yeah, and we saw in the most recent election, so many people were demoralized. They virtually were demoralized as to should I even vote anymore? Is this something that is it still worth my while to vote? And we see that, and people complaining and not being sure about who got elected and how. So the last thing we need is something that basically undermines people's feeling of trust in the election system.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct on that. If this is not the reform, this is essentially having the concrete harden on really what is an election coup, and so it's very troubling, and I think this is something that we should be encouraging our senators to vote no against H.R. 1, and it's very crucial to our survival as a nation.
Yes, and thank you so much, Kevin, for coming on and talking to us about that important topic. And we wish you a great day, and we'll talk soon. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
All right, bye. Folks, one of the things that I feel compelled to admonish us all about, remember, we do not have a quote unquote democracy in America. We are a democratic republic, which means the people aren't heard by the majority. They are heard by their representatives. And if we cannot vote for the people to represent us that we believe would be best for our nation, and instead have that decided by a small group in Washington, D.C. or wherever, then that changes us. That changes our republic. And we need to fight for that. Folks, I know that there's so many people out there saying to you, oh my gosh, it's, things are going bad and it's really bad. And I get that. Believe me, I get that. And I try to warn myself against being hyper persuasive about, how bad it is. Because ultimately our trust is in the Lord. But our democratic republic has gone smoothly for a long time, and now we are starting to hit some snags. And so what we need to do, what every citizen needs to do, is to make sure that your representatives are aware. It doesn't matter what party they are. Of course, you're going to get with some partisans, you're going to get your people say, well, I don't care, they're not in my party. But we need to be vigilant on that. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And I just suggest very strongly that you and I and everyone that you know, we've got to stand up. We've got to err on the side of being too vocal on issues like H.R. 1, and we're going to talk about later the Equality Act. These are issues that demonstrably change our nation. And so my prayer and my heart for all of us is to make sure that if we're going to go down, we're going to go down with a fight, and we're going to tell our representatives what we think about this, and we are going to make sure that we exercise our right to vote. It's the only guard against tyranny. Well, we have a lot more that we will get to here in our second half hour. We hope you'll stay with us, and we'll see you then.
Awake! This is America's final Great Awakening. The church must develop new approaches to address the cultural issues of our day. The Lord warned us of times like these. This book addresses many of the signs we have been given and argues that because of these signs, the church never should have been asleep in the first place. Pastor Tim Thompson discusses how the church should have responded and why it's not too late. This book offers suggestions on how the church can move forward in these difficult times. Awake! America's final Great Awakening. A new book by Pastor Tim Thompson is our gift this month only for any donation of $20 or more. You can help his channel broadcast the good news of Jesus Christ 24/7 by becoming a co-laborer today. Together, we can change the lives of the lost and encourage the growth of the saints. Simply go to hischannel.com, click the donation link, or send your tax-deductible gift to His Channel, Post Office Box 25, Santa Ana, California, 92702.
His Channel, teaching the gospel on listener-supported television.
I Hi, folks. Welcome back to Brad Dacus Live. I'm Michael Peffer, filling in for Mr. Dacus, president and founder of Pacific Justice Institute. Thank you for rejoining us, and we appreciate that greatly. And hopefully, I think you'll find this next half hour as enlightening as the first. We are pleased to have our attorney that is our Nevada office, that runs our Nevada operation, and her name is Emily Mimnaugh, and she is a frequent guest here because she's a rock star. So why wouldn't we bring her on here as often as we could? And we hope you'll enjoy it as much as we do. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Michael. I did not know I was so musical.
How's that? How's that for an intro?
I like it. I'll have to work on my.
Very good, very good. Hey, listen, we have been at PJI involved for a long time in what is happening on college campuses everywhere. And it seems like every year it gets worse. It seems like every year we find ourselves in a world of hurt in terms of the marketplace of ideas. And recently, you were able to address a very important segment of modern education and really of all time education, and that is you were a speaker at a conference for Christian academic faculty and staff in higher education. Tell us about what kind of what was the focus and goal of this conference?
Right. I was really honored to be asked to speak at the Northern Californian Christian Conference for Academics and Staff for Higher Education, so focused on colleges and universities. And this was hosted by InterVarsity, which is a non-denominational evangelical group that focuses on campus ministry, both for students and faculty, but this was focused really on faculty and staff.
Right.
And they have both a U.S. branch and an international branch. So it was pretty neat. One of the, I won't say benefits, but side effects of COVID, since folks are not really meeting in person for these larger conferences, we were holding this via Zoom. And so we had actually people from all over the world. We had Irish folks and Australian. So it was actually quite neat to have that international element as well. But the focus really was on religious liberty in the context of higher ed and ways in which staff and faculty can express their Christian faith even within the realm of academia and find ways that they can, network, fellowship, and really feel empowered and equipped to know what they can do on a practical and on a legal level to live, an authentic religious Christian life at that intersection of faith and academics.
Yeah, because this is not about proselytizing at the level of education. This is about the open marketplace of ideas. And whereas there was a time when that open marketplace was a lot more encouraged than it is now, we do believe in this doctrine of academic freedom. And how would you look at and maybe a brief recitation of what it is? What is academic freedom?
There's been several iterations of actual formal statements of academic freedom, but in effect, it's the idea that you should be free as an academic, as a researcher, as a professor to pursue legitimate lines of inquiry without censorship from your university. And that really depends on your relationship with the university, whether the university is public or private. But it's a general theory that you should pursue legitimate studies, look at peer-reviewed articles, and not be censored from going down unpopular or just minority, pursuing what may not be a popular or may represent a minority viewpoint regarding any specific area. And that really includes, pointing to well-researched, legitimate, peer-reviewed studies. And always, and this is one of the things, of course, you should always try to be accurate, but that you should not have such a narrow tunnel or focus of vision that you exclude relevant relevant research, relevant studies, etc., that really ought to be pursued, but because they're not popular, you're censored and you just don't even ask the relevant questions, let alone start getting the relevant answers.
Yeah, and one of the things that I have seen is oftentimes academic freedom codes, they presuppose some discomfort on the part of the students. And I think that that part is oftentimes forgotten about in our culture, where nobody wants to be offended, nobody wants to feel uncomfortable. But it is my opinion, as an adjunct professor, as well as a lawyer, it's my opinion that that's what a professor is supposed to do, is challenge the ideas that are popular with ideas that are less popular, and that helps students to hone their thinking. And at our current time, universities have a reputation for leaning on the liberal side. Is that your understanding as well? Or is that a fair statement?
That is certainly both the reputation, and a very recent study really backs that up. Just this month, March 1st, the Center for the Study of Partnership and Ideology published a survey looking at academics in higher education across the country, and found, I wouldn't say it's surprising, but it's nonetheless alarming. 1 in 3, so about 33% of academics reported that they were threatened with discipline simply for expressing a religious belief. 70% said that they found that the overall environment was hostile to conservative ideas. And over half, more than 50%, reported that they actually self-censored, which is to say they, held back or did not say something that would have been relevant academically in that environment, simply out of this fear of being, censored or disciplined, or, worse, fired. And that's not really unfounded, which is to say they're not these people who are saying, these academics who are saying they are in a hostile environment. It's not unfounded, because that same study found that over half of the students, 70%, reported that they would be okay with pushing back against these conservative ideas. And 10% of those surveyed said that they would be okay with so-called canceling or even firing people who have unpopular, controversial, or conservative ideas. So 10% of those surveyed said that they would be okay with actually terminating or firing professors who had unpopular ideas.
Wow, unbelievable. I remember distinctly when I was a young person and I was in undergrad, and I took a speech class, and you had to do all, it's this opening speech class, and you had to do all kinds of speeches, different persuasive and informative and et cetera, and every single one of them I did about the Lord and the gospel, et cetera, and the professor was frustrated and said, I can't believe there's nothing else in your life that's worth talking about. And but he was fair. He let me do what I needed to do, and in fact remarked after the persuasive speech that the points I had raised were very compelling and that kind of stuff. But today, I suspect that you wouldn't be able to do that in some classrooms.
No, and there's a lot of concern about this push for the cancel culture, and part of this woke movement, what has been termed as this woke movement arising on campuses. And there are some serious concerns that this trend, this hostility towards religion, towards those who are conservative, towards minority viewpoints, that this hostility is going to increase. In fact, 20% of those surveyed in this same study, 20% said that they would be, again, okay with dismissing, firing, canceling peers, other academics who took these minority positions, took these conservative or religious viewpoints. That's up from 10%, generally 20% of this incoming generation. And 30% of doctoral students said that if they were reviewing a grant, if they were looking at grant applications from all types of different individuals, they would discriminate against religious or conservative peers. 30% said with a straight face they would be okay with that, and they would do it. So there is concerns going forward that this situation is going to become, frankly, more uncomfortable for those who want to be honest, be genuine. Like one of the buzz phrases is "speak your truth." You tend to hear that from the left, but I think that is also fair for people of a religious faith, that they shouldn't be intimidated or silenced out of fear for their jobs or their overall livelihood security, simply because their views are seem to be a minority viewpoint, at least in the academic sphere.
Yeah, the speak your truth. It's like the diversity committee that says you can speak your truth or you can be diverse as long as you're not so diverse that you include Judeo-Christian ethic. That seems to be the moral of this story. So with the ever-changing opinions and this hostility towards free speech, is the law changing with that?
We're seeing a lot of that. The law is in flux, and we've seen this with litigation or with cases we've been talking about. Generally, litigation, as you know, takes many months, usually years, and things are moving very, very quickly right now. Of course, we've talked about the Bostock case that came out, which redefined sex within the realm of Title VII, which is your discrimination protection in the world of employment. So Title VII, under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, protects 5 basic categories of individuals from discrimination, employment discrimination, and that those, as defined, will be race, color, national origin, sex, and religion. And so we saw Bostock redefine sex already to mean both biological sex as well as gender orientation and sexual identity. Then we have now the Equality Act, of course, which we've been talking about a lot, which was one of the first 17, which was part of the fundamental pieces of that were included in one of the first 17 executive orders Biden issued, right? And he said that was going to be one of the top priorities, the legislative priority. He was going to get that accomplished in his 100 days. We're in day, I believe, 62 right now. So it's already in the Senate. So we're expecting that will redefine as well what you are and aren't allowed to say legally. And that can carry both civil and criminal penalties. So we're seeing the law push pretty hard right now towards an increased legal effort to chill speech and to prevent free speech on campus. So I think both in the academic world and generally in any employment context, it's really important to be aware of what your rights really are and how you are protected despite hostility. Sometimes it feels like from all sides.
Yeah, it really does. And the first half hour, we had Kevin Snyder on talking about the H.R. 1, this disastrous piece of legislation from Congress that will overhaul our voting rights and perhaps, at worst case scenario, destroy our democratic republic in terms of elections. And now we have this other bill, this Equality Act that we've talked about, and it bears repeating. This Equality Act is designed to basically upend traditional values and to make sure that in every aspect of society, including arguably churches and synagogues and religious entities, that they will allow for this non-biblical, ever-expanding view of sexuality.
Yeah, so it's definitely it's very important people are paying attention. I know I get probably over 20 emails a day now about these H.R. 1, which Kevin Snyder was talking about, H.R. 5, the so-called Equality Act. So people are definitely on the Christian side, and I think religious people in general, conservatives, and just really people with common sense are, I think, becoming aware of the contents of these bills and just what it might actually do if it's passed to our country.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything happening at the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, that maybe produce some optimism in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, we do have, of course, generally speaking, a conservative majority, though, of course, Justice Gorsuch wrote the opinion in Bostock, so you can't, assume any outcome ever. But we had a great victory earlier this month on March 8th in a case involving religious liberty and freedom and free speech in the campus, in the academic environment. A student named Chike Uzabunam was a student evangelist who simply wanted to go out and preach the word, spread the gospel. and hand out literature. He was stopped within minutes the first time he tried to do that. He was told he needed to get a permit, had to go to a so-called designated free speech zone. And so he said, okay, I didn't know that, but I will do that. He did that. He got his permit. He went to the zone. He was stopped again within minutes and told it was disruptive and he wasn't going to be allowed to continue. And eventually he brought a lawsuit to sue the university about their discriminatory policy that violated his free speech and his free exercise of religion. Now, in the course of that lawsuit, what the university did was change their policy because they took a look at it and said, yeah, this is definitely unconstitutional. Yeah. And so by doing that, what they were trying to do was end the case because they didn't want to answer, frankly, for their unconstitutional policies in court. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. Even if you change your policies, even if you say you have no tangible, quantifiable economic damages, that is still a harm that we can redress in the form of something called nominal damages. And that's really important because when you have a right that is, you can't put a value on it and it's priceless, that doesn't mean it's worthless.
Exactly.
And the court said just because you can't put a dollar value on it, and this is Kavanaugh, he said, even if you cannot or you choose not to put a price tag on it, it is a harm and we will remedy it. And so that was very important, not just in the academic context, but in any context where you have a harm to a fundamental right, it is redressable and the court will hear your case.
Yeah, and that is a fantastic and necessary result, particularly for advocates that do what we do, people who have similar ministries as a PGI, is that these things, oftentimes we pursue them, and as we get through the litigation, all of a sudden the college, in these kinds of cases, particularly the freedom to speak on campus cases, they will realize that, yeah, this is not going to uphold, this is not going to be past constitutional muster, and so they change the policy, and oftentimes that stops the litigation, and we end up not getting a holding from the court that says that kind of conduct is blatantly unconstitutional, and that's what we need. We need cases that say, hey, look, this is unconstitutional. You can't do this.
Yeah, and we've seen that more recently, even in the COVID context, where we saw that in the Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn, the big Supreme Court case that came out on November 25,
yes,
which struck down the unconstitutional policies. And in that case, again, New York, after the fact, tried to change the rules so they wouldn't be held accountable in court. And the justices were very clear. They said no, because if we don't rule on this case, there's nothing stopping you from changing the rules a week later. And they didn't say this, but I think it's fair to say we don't trust you not to do that. And so we're going to give you this ruling so you have this, and it is part of our jurisprudence. And going forward, you do have this protection. And of course, we've seen that play out in other cases like Harvest Rock, of course, PJI's case, Gateway City versus Santa Clara, where we had that great victory. So these are really important protections. And the court has said, no, you can't just change the rules to avoid liability.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because we saw it in, as you said, our case, Gateway. At the last minute, the county, who had basically said pound sand all the way to everybody, they're saying, well, we're going to change the law here. Not good enough. We want the Supreme Court to say that what you did was unconstitutional. And indeed, thank the Lord, that's what they said.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so can we give, I'm sure some professors in our audience that hear us, and so can we give them hope? Is it possible for them to speak about faith in the classroom?
Absolutely. The first answer is yes. If you're at a public university, you are protected by the First Amendment. And what really, I would say the threshold question, if you're in the classroom, is it relevant? Is it germane to the subject matter? If you're teaching, I don't know, advanced calculus, probably a discussion about marital policy in the U.S. is not relevant.
Right.
If you're a theology professor, however, that is something that absolutely may be relevant, depending on what you're discussing that day. And there are various things you can do in the classroom. you can use the Socratic method. You want to foster debate, encourage ideas. Like you were talking about earlier, Michael, part of this is, to make students think. Even if you take the popular position, it's important to know why and be able to give reasons for that, not just, well, that's what everyone else says. And that's what we go along, that's just what we go along with. The whole point of university is to make you think and help you become not just intelligent in terms of knowing information, but having character and education and being able to stand up and defend whatever it is you believe.
Absolutely. And if we, of course, have a significant case that we've been dealing with here at PGI for now, I think, going on 4 years. And our client, Professor Eric Thompson, a sociology professor, he sought to give the students something else to think about. And that's the Socratic method. What about this? What about that? How do you deal with this argument? And he brought research to back it up. And perhaps one might say some of his words were inopportune, but nonetheless, it was clear he wasn't pointing any individual out. But that was not enough for the diversity committee. And frankly, it was not enough for the district because they lost at arbitration that we represented Mr. Thompson in. They lost at a writ that went to the Superior Court. And then they lost now in the appellate court. But they seem to they don't want to take no for an answer. It's as if they've built this construct that is, if it falls down, they've got real problems.
Absolutely. And it's not, these protections that we're talking about in an academic context, they of course extend outside in many instances to individuals in all types of realms of employment. So we're not just talking about the First Amendment, where there's also, like we were saying earlier, Title VII. So it's important to be aware, you don't have to be a university professor at a public institution in order to have protection against religious discrimination.
Yeah.
And PJI handles quite a few of these cases. They go to the EEOC, and you can file a claim for either religious discrimination or based on the guidance that we have from the EEOC. They will often recommend that, to the extent possible and not if overly disruptive, there's something called a religious accommodation. So you can express your faith often in the workplace. If other people are expressing similar views, they can't discriminate against you. And if you need an accommodation, often we can request that, and your employer will do their best to accommodate whatever it is you need in order to help you live your faith and not have to compromise yourself morally.
Yeah, that's very important too. And all these resources are available on our website, pgi.org. There's a lot of resources there. You can contact us free of charge. Our resources are free of charge. You can talk to an attorney all over the country. We have 11 offices at this point all over the country, soon to be more, perhaps, from what I understand. But there's a lot going on, but we're here to help. We want to help folks. And this is a very important issue. We've got a lot of experience dealing with this issue of academic freedom. Talk to us about this issue involving Jordan Peterson, a well-known thinker and YouTube advocate. Talk to us about that and how that's being treated in Canada, for instance.
Right. Canada is one of the countries that has passed a law that, well, at that time it was proposing a law when this occurred, which would basically penalize, and in some cases criminalize, the use of someone's, by not using someone's preferred pronoun. So if I'm a biological female, but my preferred pronoun is him or his, and you were to call me a miss or a ms or a her, that would actually be a legal violation. And he came out and he said, this is too far. This is too much. This is a violation of free speech. This law, it just goes much too far. And he was effectively canceled. He was, all kinds of nasty epithets were, hurled against him. And, you don't have to agree with him to at least be able to listen. And that's, again, going back to the academic realm. The whole point is to be able to have discussion. And when you can't even talk to each other, when you're talking past each other, and this really kind of launched the beginning of the cancel culture. Yeah. it was really kind of the jumping off point for this. We're not even going to have a discussion. We're just going to shut it down. And of course, that law has passed in Canada, and now we're looking at similar things here in the United States with HR 5 or the Equality Act.
Yeah.
And I should add, though, that Canada, of course, is a Commonwealth country. You're having different reactions, of course, in places like the United Kingdom, where there is currently a series of proposals to actually enhance and bolster academic freedom. And they have even suggested that they have basically an academic champion that will encourage universities to fully support the free exchange of ideas and actually investigate instances of the chilling of ideas. So I don't want it all to sound negative. There are other countries taking a different approach.
So the idea of cancel culture is really firmly ensconced in our society right now. Particularly, it's getting worse. What general advice can we give folks that will support faith in the workplace?
Generally, it depends on if you're working for a public or a private or a religious organization. But generally speaking, I would look around, and even if you're only protected by Title VII, you can see that you are being treated fairly and equally, which is to say, if other people are expressing their political views, you should be able to express yours. If others are expressing their religious views or their anti-religious views, you should be able to express yours. If someone has their Bible out or their Quran out, you can keep your Torah out. It's generally looking for equality of treatment, which is you can't favor one viewpoint over another. If you open that forum in any context, you need to allow all points of view to be expressed. And, really also you want to support your colleagues, support people of all faiths. If you're a Christian, support your Jewish friends, support your Muslim friends, even support your atheist friends. The point is you want tolerance and, allowance for all viewpoints. And if you ever have a question, it's okay to ask your supervisor, look at your employee handbook, talk to your union if you have one, and of course, reach out to a group like PJI or another nonprofit that can help you really understand your legal rights. So the best thing you can do, and this is old but true, is an ounce of prevention. So if you see trouble, if you're not sure, you can always ask and get advice. It's always free from PJI, or you can reach out to other similar groups.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Emily. We could go on, I'm sure, for a long time here on this subject because it's vital. Education is vital, and having the free expression ideas. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I certainly appreciate that.
Thanks, Michael.
All right. So one of the things that in our last few seconds here, one of the things that's happened through our case involving Professor Thompson is there are people who have come to his defense who are they don't agree with him at all, but they see real trouble when academic freedom is attacked. And that has created a real movement within this particular college, and it's very interesting to see, and we'll of course see what will occur about that. But this is important. If you have children or grandchildren in college, tell them they have some freedom to speak. If you have people or you are a person who teaches at any level, there are things you can do, and we are happy to help. Well, we have come to the end of our program for today. Remember, they're going to take away your rights unless you stand up, fight, and be noticed. Lord bless and keep you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye now.